Morning, everyone. Welcome to another Monday. Our 10 o'clock business meeting. We'll just start right off. Jessica.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jessica Warren, Human Resources. I do have one request from Health and Human Services. Is Gina James on? Or Carol?
Yes, she is.
So their social services coordinator, Melissa Linden, has put in her resignation. She's going to the Department of Commerce in September. So they'd like to fill her position.
Okay. Gina, did you want to speak?
Hi, good morning. Yes, so I think I caught most of what Jessica, I was in transit there for a minute, getting switched over. So our social services coordinator has put in her notice. This position is responsible for oversight and management of a variety of local funding streams, as well as some program agreements we have with state agencies. It includes things like housing and homelessness with our consolidated homeless grant and document recording fees, including point in time count, the homeless management information system, coordinated entry, as well as just general contract management and oversight. This position also oversees the community development block grant, public services, historically Meals on Wheels, as well as the criminal justice treatment account contract with the state and the pass-through contracts with providers. This position also oversees the Veterans Relief Fund and staffs the advisory board and the advisory board meetings, as well as processing the weekly applications for assistance with the Veterans Relief Fund. So that's kind of a broad overview. We'd like to post and get the position refilled.
I'm assuming that additional duties will be pending with the opioid settlement funds.
There
That
is
person would be doing that.
likely, yes. There's also other duties as assigned, which we know can mean other things. So
Anybody?
I'm okay with going forward with that.
Some questions.
Mhm.
So Gina, it sounds like a pretty significant job description. Is that, I would assume that there are reports that have been produced by her. Are there some we could take a look at?
a lot of the work is connected to specific funding or grants. So the reports are filling the grant requirements or deliverables for the different programs and funding sources. Is there specific information you're thinking of?
Well, I think I'll always put pressure on departments to try and have a smaller staff if possible, just trying to figure out how to do things more efficiently. And so in this case, you're having a vacancy, and I'm thinking, it doesn't sound like it, but is that something where you could share the load more? And I don't know how to answer that, but when you have somebody that's in this somewhat supervisory capacity, it seemed like, or semi-auditing capacity, I'd like to see as much as possible before saying, yeah, add another individual. And of course, I haven't asked who her supervisor is or how long she's been on the job, or what's the reason she's leaving. Those are all in play.
Sure. I'm her supervisor, and she's been with the county about almost exactly 3 years. And she's leaving for a position with the Department of Commerce. Actually, she'll be doing work statewide with around coordinated entry. So that's part of the work she's been doing here for us, and hopefully is taking all of our local requests up with her to the state. It's a lot of work. We do always look at, what that would mean if if the position is not refilled and where that work would level out. A lot of it would fall onto me probably to do. It is a full-time position and she's been busy, and a lot of it does include that monitoring and auditing with providers, which can be very detailed work to do. We would like to refill this particular position.
I'm okay with it.
Yes, I'm okay. I think Commissioner Mortensen was requesting some of the reports, and maybe that might be a good, just a regular report back. I think most of those grants have at least quarterly reports that come from the county.
Yeah, there are some regular reports that we work on.
Would it be particularly cumbersome just to make sure we get a copy when those reports go in? Would that meet your need?
Yeah, I'm hesitating because it's always hard to explain. Whenever an employee comes in a job, they kind of define the job. I mean, there's a job description, but they actually define what the job is, and trying to find someone exactly like that is probably not the easiest thing in the world. So I did want to understand specifically, is this the kind of a job that is just elbow grease, or is this kind of a job where there's some thought involved? And I know I've talked to Gina over the years when I've asked about auditing. So you go through receipts and all that and you audit your grants, but it's different when you go actually on site and say, you bought this under this grant, that kind of thing. Just overall tightening up the loop. And when it comes to transparency, that's what I'm trying to hint at. So we don't just perfunctorily approve a replacement.
Yeah, I would second some of that. It depends on the talent you get in there. The job functions and the description kind of changes to the talents that you have, and that's probably what's happened here in this current instance. You have to have a level of comfort or ease with the people that fill those jobs. And in this case, I feel like Gina probably has a decent handle on it, and so would go with it also. But it will probably change depending on the talent you get in as to what you want them to do.
Yeah, it's part of my advertisement too, that checking the box when it comes to humans is something where we tend to go for all kinds of reasons, including protecting ourselves from accusations. But anybody who's been around enough, and you're the youngest guy here, so that might not apply there, has to know that attitude is very important, and flexibility is extremely important also. So always trying to get one person to fit just this one job is something I would encourage everyone to think on a slightly larger scale.
So I do have one other question, and that is Gina or perhaps Carol. Is this a job transfer that is the result of too many irons on the fire? That is, it's a daunting task. It's overwhelming. That it sounds like her responsibility is going to be much more limited to the homeless and the count in time.
I think, just thinking back about feedback I've received, I think it's a good variety. There's, I would say it's probably half of the workload is housing and homelessness, and the other half involves some other things. So I think it's a good variety of work for the position. Yeah.
And she'll be commuting to Olympia, or does she already live up there?
I believe it's a remote position.
Would you repeat her name, please? That's resigned.
Melissa Linden.
Linda.
She's the one that sits with us at the Veterans Advisory Board.
That's correct.
Okay. You know, part of what still seems odd is that I barely have met Melissa Linden, and maybe my memory is failing, but for the amount of work she does, I would have assumed we would have bumped into her sometime before. But you still got the answer you wanted, so.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Gina.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then that's the only request I have this morning. I do have executive sessions for collective bargaining and performance of a public employee at the end.
At the end?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Anything else for me?
Not until we get to the end.
Yeah.
Budget. How you feeling? You feeling getting better?
I am
Good.
much, much, much better. So,
Mr. Chairman, I have been thinking of the order that with which we listen to our department heads is, I think in this case is backwards. Before we hire people, we should make sure we have the money.
We should have
right?
the
We
money.
should start off with the budget on Monday morning. Make
okay,
sure.
I have
things-
some news on that. So, Kathy Funk Baxter, Finance Director. Before I came in, I ran the sales tax overview. This is the monies that are for the month of May and are dispersed in July. And so the good news is that on the sales tax front, our revenues are about 4% on regular and optional tax, 4% ahead of last May. That's pretty much just keeping up with inflation.
Mm.
So, but on the bad side, on the bad news side, the auditor's office prepares a monthly report and looks at every month's on the recording revenues. And our recording revenues, I think I mentioned this before, but our recording revenues are significantly down. So through July, they're down about $1 million over last year.
Recording revenues are down about $1 million.
Mhm.
That's the document recording fees.
Yes, and there's various ones in this number.
Mhm.
So we weren't doing $1 million a month, so
No, cumulative so far through July, compared to July last year cumulative,
a year to date for,
it's $1 million difference. Most of the months are down anywhere from 30%. On average, it looks like it's 50% less than what we received last year.
A part of that
Good news is licensing revenue is up and is holding its own. So it's not as much. I mean, we're only talking about 80, on average 80,000 a month from that. But the recording fees prior to this year was on average in the 350 range
Mhm.
a month.
was that including the month of July?
Yes.
So I think part of that decline has to do with the city of Longview taking the money that had been pooled with us.
Right. Part of
and
it
then
is that.
This year, they're pulling that out of it. You
Right.
know, as the largest city, there's going to be a lot of recording fees that don't come to us.
Right.
Anymore because.
But
of-
I also,
yeah,
you're also seeing a decline in activity.
Right.
too.
Yeah, both of
Both.
those.
So out of the $1 million, that's the total difference from the county viewpoint.
Yes.
So if we take into the fact that some amount went out, that's a pretty good estimate, by estimate, probably 150,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
It's
still a big hit.
Yeah, it's still a significant decline, even considering the fact that the Longview revenue is not coming in.
Didn't the Longview revenues come in at around 600,000?
I'll get you the
Okay.
actual number.
That's the number that I recall reading in the paper or something.
No,
Their share was.
it was half that.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
high. I don't think it's 600,000.
They were expecting about 75,
375.
yeah, for the year.
The auditors got her hand up.
So I will, I'll go back and look at that actual number if you like, or Carolyn. Is
Yeah.
Carolyn?
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I had to rejoin. So the numbers that I provided, those are prior to Longview's deduction. So as just a really good example, we're down in July compared to July of last year. It's a 46% decrease, 336,000 to 231,000. So just wanted to clarify that this is just the money that we're collecting. And then from that, Longview gets to deduct their portion.
So we're just comparing apples to apples.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, so on the recording fees, but on the larger pool of money that we're earning, sales tax, we're still holding pretty well. So I've, this past week, I've been working on reviewing budget submissions.
Before you go there.
Yes,
There, we were also getting income from the investment roof avenue. I assume that's still climbing a bit because we're averaging it over.
yes, I can get you that information. It's significantly over what we originally budgeted.
And just out of curiosity, what do you do with those earnings? Do those get allocated to the pools in proportion to the certificate holders, if you will?
Yes,
Okay.
the
thank you.
majority of it is in the general fund of the earnings. Mhm. But they go to the actual fund as the different special revenue funds, et cetera.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to be revising the budget calendar just a little bit, just some tweaks. I would like to get set up with a specific departments, their workshops in the month of September so that they can come before the board commissioners. And so they'll know their date and I'll know their date and be prepared. So most of the month of September will be workshops with individual departments. And then the month of October are very specific workshops on things like personnel, motor pool, capital, things like that. So I'm trying to get everything lined up and make sure we have enough time for everything. Also, this past week, I worked on auditor schedules for 2022 related to budget entries and budget resolutions. And also a couple of other meetings requested that they had. In the area of risk, I had a pretty busy week with risk duties as well. Completed a pollution liability application. And this is one that we had never done before on our tanks, or on underground tanks. So they asked for some specific information about that. Completed the review of appraisals. They sent us appraisals of all of our buildings that are over $1 million. And so we looked at that. There's one building on the list that I think they had it at 3 million, something like that, but it's vacant and we're looking to sell that. It's like a modular building, I think, at the landfill. And so we're looking to sell that and remove it. So we've asked them to reduce the valuation on that one. So that should help a little bit on our property insurance.
A question. In the private world, I understand you have choices of market and that kind of stuff. How does this impact us? So if our entire premises were assessed at $100 in value, what difference does it make if it goes up to 200 or down to 50?
Well, actually, our part of our assessment from the risk pool on the property is based upon the valuation of our property. So they want those values to be maintained and so that they can have adequate coverage for us. So they still, but the policy, the way the risk pool works, because I did ask, what if we have one of these valuations wrong, completely wrong? And they said, no, it's replacement, as far as the risk pool, it's replacement value at the time of the loss. And but these valuations are helping them to maintain the assessment appropriately.
So how do we get those assessments? I mean,
They hired an appraiser to actually do the appraisal on all of our buildings that were over $1 million.
like this building, for example.
They have an appraisal for this one, for the Hall of Justice.
How do you appraise this building? I mean, there's not a market for it.
Right.
Well, I think you mentioned it's replacement costs, not fair market value.
That's
right?
where I'm driving at.
Yeah.
It's-
No, the actual appraisal, the good news is that our insurance, our risk is if we had a loss, it's replacement value.
Mhm.
But for purposes of the assessment, it's based upon appraisal value. And the appraisal value is a pretty generic as far as like, what would it cost to actually, they do have the calculations of price per square foot of what they believe it would cost to replace the building. But it's also realistic based upon the age of our building, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, they do
Yeah.
have an appraiser. I don't have those skill sets.
You mean you don't have a Ouija?
Yeah, I
board?
don't have a
Yeah.
Ouija board.
Ouija board? Yeah.
So I am curious, what big empty $3 million building do we own? Where is that?
It's a modular building. I thought I think it's at the landfill, but I had all of the buildings looked at by Mike, and asked him to look at everything to see if things looked reasonable. And that was one of the ones that stood out, saying that they felt like that value was not reasonable.
Could that be the one at the Tenant Way landfill? The building over there?
What's the evaluation? You said 3 million?
Mhm. Yeah.
Would you
and
pay
we're-
3 million for
Yeah.
that?
And we're telling them we'd like to have it reduced
Yeah.
to about 300,000 because it is it's vacant.
Yeah.
And we're looking to dispose of it. But Mike relayed back to me, I don't think we're going to dispose of it until like either the end of the year or the beginning of next year. So we still need to keep it on the books, but
Okay.
not at $3 million.
So if we have a loss, they replace everything in replacements cost in the policy.
Right.
What they charge us for premium is
Based-
kind of like
right.
this, yeah.
It's based upon
Yeah.
their best guess.
Yeah, in terms of disposing stuff, we know that the sheriff's office has had penciled in for a long time, a building for, when you're at a crime scene, you grab something, you got to store it, evidence.
Evidence?
Thank you. And we've made no progress, even though I don't doubt that we should do something there. That's just in case repurposing can be done.
Yeah.
We also, I prepared materials for this week's presentation to you on the risk pool. So I did that. We had two areas that we had to catch up on some payments that were behind. One was our workers' comp fund. We had a shortage in that there's a bank account that's maintained to pay claims. And so we had one invoice that was like $23,000 that had been overlooked and had not been paid. So they were unable to make a payment, a scheduled payment out of that workers' comp pool last week because of that. So we caught that up and hopefully we're back on track. We also had several expenses that the risk pools presented to us for July and August. And they're pretty significant. So we caught up on all of those payments as well this past week. So it was a big week for making payments on risk and on risk management. And let me see, that's it.
I'm trying to make a joke out of this, but that is really surprising how much you've done and gotten involved in. And you have a staffing problem, right?
Yes, yeah, I am actually delighted. I have several applicants for my budget analyst, and so I'm going to start reviewing those and hopefully get some interviews scheduled for the budget analyst position.
Okay, and then you might even need someone else too at some point.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
so
Okay, thank you.
anything
Thanks.
else?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Corrections.
You brought reinforcements today.
Yeah.
I did. I'll give a brief update on the population. I'm sorry, Brand Fox, Director of Corrections, and this is Captain Chris Moses. Our population today is 234. We had 50 bookings over the weekend. As we've discussed previously, all of the local jurisdictions are now able to book on drug possession as a misdemeanor. In the 50 bookings over the weekend, 10 of those included a drug possession charge. Longview started earlier, as we previously discussed, but now all the jurisdictions can book on those charges.
Okay.
Longview will be the primary booker on possession, I would assume. We have an agenda item on tomorrow. Yep, go ahead.
A question on the drug possession there. You probably don't know the circumstances necessarily, but I get the impression we get a lot of people that are heavy drug users. Are these heavy drug users you're seeing, or are these just 22-year-olds who haven't figured out that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing?
I would say they're heavy drug users. That would be my assessment.
So it's a problem group of people. It's not just some arbitrary child or.
Correct. And most of those were combined with other charges. So they're not just being booked for possession, it's possession plus. So they were maybe
That's
contacted
really
for
what I'm
something
trying to
else, and
ask,
then they
yeah.
have drugs on them as well.
Okay, so it's just not just the police grabbing someone off the street, just who's peacefully minding his business.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We have an agenda item on tomorrow. So I wanted to go over that. It's for it's labeled MOUD, but it's the same thing as MAT. So medically assisted treatment, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So we started our MAT program funded through the mental health tax in, I think, around 2019, and expanded it through this grant in March of 22. And the numbers, when you look at it, are a little bit confusing. It shows 3 different amounts. I don't know if you have it in front of you. It shows a prior maximum contract amount, an amount of an increase in a total maximum compensation. The number to focus on is that middle one, 357,377.04. That's the actual amount for July of 23 to June of 24. That large number, the $869,000 amount, is the total for the life of this. So that would be March of 22 to June of 24. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah.
So with this approval, we'll be able to reduce the amount we're requesting for mental health tax for MAT by about $76,000.
And again, you probably sick of answering the same question. MAT is something we do because we think it's good practice. It's not mandated by law.
It is mandated by RCW as well
It's
as
now
case law.
mandated.
Yes.
Did that happen fairly recently?
Yes, fairly recently. The RCW I can give you if you'd like it.
No, that's okay. Just, yeah,
There was also some significant case law in Whatcom County that required us to start. That's when we initially started. It was because of the case law in Whatcom County with the ACLU. It is now, jails are required to do this now.
Okay, and there are always ancillary questions like if I'm in jail and I'm on an MAT and I get released, I'm no longer on MAT. Am I handed over to another agency?
Yes, and Chris might be able to explain that a little better than I can.
Yeah, so when they leave the facility, they're given at least 7 days worth of medication to bridge that gap between when they are connected with a community provider. At release, our medical staff will reach out, make that appointment, get all that set up so that hopefully when they get out, they're going to this provider and continuing on with the program.
You know, the public is never a happy camper to pay for someone's drug use. And in this case, is there, to be on MAT, that's just kind of a humane way of trying to deal with people, but do they have obligations to cut back? Like if I go in as a heroin addict, are you trying to obligate me to leave jail clean?
Could you say that again? I'm not sure I
Okay.
understood the question.
If I'm a drug addict, why don't I just get myself incarcerated so I can get my drugs for free? So I'm trying to ask, how do we protect ourselves against that?
This would be available to any of people that become inmates in the community. So if they were in the community, they would go to these providers and be on MAT while they're out. It's available to them when they're out. The plus of starting it in jail is that we can kind of not force their hand, but they are a captive audience. So we may be getting people on treatment that otherwise in the community would not, because they have drugs accessible. So the thought process is you get them clean off of drugs in jail and get them into this treatment program.
Right.
So that when they get out, they're less likely to use illegal drugs because they're on a legal substance that reduces the cravings and reduces the likelihood that they would use drugs, opioids specifically.
Yeah, I guess I still don't know the answer to my question. Did you understand
But-
my question?
It's available to them. We force them to take it if they end up in our system.
We can't force them to, but they're more likely to because in jail, they're not able to access opioids. In the
Yeah,
community,
so their choice is they
could.
they can go through withdrawal by themselves, or they can
Right.
have some help.
Correct.
And it's available to them on the outside. They don't have to go to jail to get it. Just when we take them in, we say, these are your options. You can go through this alone, or we can do this.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, the problem is if I am an addict and I'm having trouble finding something to keep me comfortable on an even keel, I'll get myself thrown in jail. I'll get taken care of for some amount of time, maybe short, and then I'm back out. In there, there's never an obligation to wean myself off of the drugs.
Yeah. Well, I think what Miranda's saying is it's available out in the public. If they're having trouble getting their heroin or whatever drug
Yeah.
of choice, there is places in the public they could go to try and help them wean them off that. They don't have to go to jail to access it.
I see what you're saying. I wonder,
So I know that the medically treatment programs get canceled, or used to get canceled once somebody came into custody. And then they were having all kinds of behavior problems, withdrawals and stuff. Has your staff noticed a change in behaviors since we've been on this plan, that the withdrawals and the
Well, as we've discussed before, I think part of what has made it a little complicated is COVID
Mm.
and the change in drug laws. So all of these things kind of happened at the same time. So it's
True.
pretty difficult to have a snapshot of before and after
Mhm.
because the landscape changed almost entirely right as we were on the front end of starting this program. So I think it's going to take time.
Do you know enough about the medical plan as to how long they expect it to take to wean people off of the drugs?
Well, they're used two different ways while they're incarcerated. One is part of their detox
Mhm.
to taper. It's the safest way to detox people off opioids. So these medications are used for that. And then they're used as the treatment program after that if they choose to do that. So not everybody that is in jail chooses to do this, even if they qualify for it, but it's an option. And as far as their Medicaid, that piece has been worked out. Our system notifies Medicaid when they come in and notifies Medicaid when they go out. And it's restarted immediately now instead of having that. I think there used to be like a 30-day waiting period.
Rather than being canceled, it's suspended, so it's
Correct.
the paperwork's still in order.
Yep.
And that's actually something that makes sense.
Yes.
To follow up on the change in behavior observation, it always depends on where you look. Like if you ask the public what the change of behavior out in the street is, it's not a pretty picture what they have to say. The reason I bring it up and talking about it, first, I accept that you have no choice, the RCW. So I'm not concerned over that. It's just, we don't get to talk too much without
Yeah.
in the public eye, and we've got some experts here. The model is, and I think there was a sergeant out of Portland who did this pretty well, I'm told, but again, I'm told.
Yeah.
So if you go to jail and you've got a detox, it's not a pleasant thing at all. But once you've done that 2 or 3 times, you decide you're going to leave the area. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a viable solution to have people leave. And this model here is one where you don't have to suffer the pain of it. And I'm actually conflicted because, as you know, I think it's none of our business what somebody does with their with the body. But at the same time, none of the taxpayers should be forced to pay for something they find abhorrent. So
Well, I have 2 comments. One, I don't know who the sergeant is you're referring to, but we see people that will come and detox with us 3 times in a month and then 3 times the next month. So that is not, in my years of experience in corrections, true at all in this community. That detox does not stop people from using. That's not a lesson they're learning. And additionally,
I didn't say it stops people from using. I'm saying it causes them to leave town.
that has not proven to be true.
Well,
here
I don't
either.
think you can say that. I don't think I can say it. So it's just a
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah, we see the same people over and over and over, and they'll detox.
Right,
so
but
many
our
times.
system isn't a hard-nosed system, and that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Right. The second part, though, is the use of the medications for detox is not necessarily to make it more comfortable for them, but to keep them safe and to reduce liability to the county, because you don't want to have a bad outcome. And you can have bad outcomes and deaths due to opioid detox. So it is harm reduction to the county. It's a risk reduction. It isn't the intent. Our intent, my intent is not, let's make this as easy as possible. It's to reduce risk.
Have we had anybody in jail die of an overdose?
Yes.
Have we
Eh.
had anybody in jail die of an underdose?
Of what?
Underdose, in other words, detoxed.
Yes.
They died as a consequence of an opioid detoxing.
Yes.
How long ago?
We had four deaths between 2013 and 2014, and then one at
Because-
the end of 2016. All of those were related to opioid withdrawal.
Because they were prevented from getting their fix? Is that why they died? That's the thing I'm looking for.
Typically, and not specific to the ones I'm speaking of. Typically, the deaths are related to dehydration on opioid withdrawal deaths.
And
It's
we've
related
had-
to dehydration.
And we have had people die in jail from withdrawal.
Related to withdrawal, yes,
And you said 4?
yes. They've all been litigated and settled at this point, but yes.
I know 4 that have died of essentially overdose, but I was totally unaware that we had anybody die from an underdose, if you will.
During the detox process.
That's correct.
And how many since we started the MOUD program that we're talking about today?
Our last in custody death was, we had an overdose last summer. And prior to that was 2016. So we've had no deaths related to with opioid withdrawal since we started doing it this way.
Thank you.
Yeah, these conversations are always interesting to me. I'm a little more on Commissioner Morton's side, a little more hard nosed because we spend a ton of money on people that don't want to do things right. And yet then we don't help some people that have tried to do right things all their life and just need a hand. So it gets a little frustrating to me, but I understand this is really, you're just talking about a grant you're getting from the state to help with the program, and you're giving us some numbers of what that's gonna be. And our decision is, we want to accept the money from the state or we don't want to accept the money from the state.
Right.
Yeah,
And the state money will, as I said, offset
right.
the
Some of the
the ask
mental
for mental
health
health
tax.
tax. And
Yeah, so,
our hope is that this will be able to shift more to the state in years going forward as well.
Yeah, let me just cap it off. Just to be sure, I look at us as a team, including department heads and trying to solve these problems. And that we have no choice in some things like MAT. I mean, that's beyond what we can discuss, but we can certainly try and put our heads together and say, does it really work? Does it really do the job? And is it worth the cost? And that's all I'm after.
yeah.
Great.
Anything
Thank you.
else?
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
You know, actually, thanks for the conversation on that today. It's always helpful for me, other than tomorrow it just shows up type thing. IT.
You. You.
Good morning, Commissioners. Kim Hort, IT Director, and Mike Bamford, Deputy IT Director. We appreciated your time last Wednesday to kind of shift our focus on retention and then also discuss the Microsoft Enterprise renewal. We are looking at an annual cost increase based off of what we were paying 3 years ago. The standard Office user license has gone up 32%. And then I've forecasted about a 7% growth in service accounts or additional users over the 3 years of the upcoming contract. That's our as-is renewal. We are also requesting to add in a compliance and retention modules. This would assist with categorizing data along with records management, so email archiving. The licensing cost per user is $226, so that is why there is such a large increase in addition to that 32% licensing. Do you guys have questions about the modules or?
So the revenue is generated on an assessment from each department based on the number of computers that have these licenses.
It is based off of users and then also service accounts. So if there's like an application that requires an email account that consumes a license.
So
Still, it's,
The last contract we signed with Microsoft was $294 a user and today we're looking at, is it another 3-year? It's another 3-year contract, right?
Yes, this would
Yeah.
lock in the rates.
And
for 3 years.
Microsoft is saying it's 387 now versus 294. And those costs, as Commissioner Weber alluded to, kind of go out to the users
Mhm.
in their departments. They have to budget for that type of stuff.
Correct.
And that's,
then it comes back to us.
yeah, then it comes back to
Yeah.
us. Then the addition stuff. So these top 2 things are really just a renewal of everything we are currently doing. Is that fair?
Primarily, the user licensing is the bare minimum. The top section includes that request for additional modules. So
Oh.
that would be the total picture sticker
Oh.
price.
Okay, so the top, you've included this additional, so we could see that, okay.
Correct.
So EA is enterprise
Enterprise agreement.
agreement, okay? And just to recover what the commissioner just covered, the annual cost what was the annual cost the last time, the last contract?
The annual cost was $240,000.
$240K, and that got us the licensing for everybody in the county?
Plus service accounts, yes.
Okay, and then what you're looking at here is an increase that's a little more than a factor of 2, right? And then if I go to user licensing, I don't understand it. I don't understand. How do we get to 544,000 from 240,000?
So the licensing per user was the 294 with a 32% increase.
I'm sorry, it's the 294 is the previous cost, and then we add the 32%. And we're doing apples to apples there.
Yep.
If we didn't want to do anything else, it would be 294 times a third, essentially, third 280. Be careful of doing arithmetic. Call it 100. So I'm up to about 394. So 387 is the number you're saying has a 32%. In it.
And then it's an additional 226 on top of that for the.
No, the 226
retention.
would be in addition to that
The
387.
That's in addition to the 387, yeah. Yeah, so, but we haven't had the compliance and retention modules to help.
We
which
have
is-
not,
Which
no.
is why
This
we're
is a
saving everything that doesn't need to be saved, so.
Yeah, and also in the third, you're factoring in, and this could or may or may not happen, you're factoring in growth in users.
Correct. Or service accounts. Mhm.
So there's a little bit in there that may or may not happen. It depends on how the county grows. Am I reading that? That's what I'm understanding. Okay.
So the 544,000 does not include anything in the compliance and retention modules.
It does.
It does.
That's
Okay.
the full request.
Okay, I thought we were talking about this before. We need a plan before we can do that.
So the plan is looking at decommissioning the Barracuda appliance for email archiving. The strategy that we've worked on with the retention committee is the system's not user-friendly when it comes to managing.
Okay, those words don't mean anything to me, not user-friendly. I cannot quantify that.
So we have licensing locked in with Barracuda for all the way through 2027. And currently that pricing, if you want a graph, is $85. And then once that contract terminates in 2027, it's going to go to $225. So the intent is to kind of overlap the systems to where we can configure the Microsoft compliance module. So then we could be ready to turn off the Barracuda email gateway in 2027.
So to get to this bottom one, it's a process.
Yes,
I mean, it's not a light switch.
no, there would be configuration to where we can categorize data.
So does it ever make sense on our level to set a placeholder we want to get here? And if we agree, if we can get to an agreement on the process, then we flip that switch and then this comes in? Does that ever make sense? I mean, I've done some of that in the past, set placeholders if certain things happen. So it's already in the budget.
I wouldn't do it necessarily that way. It's not a bad thing to earmark something, but the problem when you earmark something, it will get spent. It'll get spent before the proper discussions have occurred, before the proper plan is out there. That's how we get ourselves into the condition that we basically are in. And trying to suggest that the answer is a tool is the wrong thing. The answer is not the tool until you know what it is that you're doing with the data. Right. And
Although what Rick described is exactly what we did when we switched over the tax and we did that whole huge shift over. We saved money over several years and then we were able
when we did what?
to adopt. When we shifted over what was it, the tips or Melanie, do you remember? I can't remember the acronym.
PIMS to PACS.
Right. Because I think it was like over about a 3-year period of time that we put the finances aside and they didn't get spent until it was time to turn on the switch. So I think that strategy can work, but we had agreed ahead of time that was the direction to go. And when staff gets that direction from the commissioners, they know, what their limits and guidelines are. So,
Understood.
so the
And
plan ahead, so the understanding is we can budget this. It'll take a while to get the equipment anyway. And then the equipment can start doing the processing of according to the retention schedule and all that decommissioning stuff.
And again, it was a request for your input. So if it's something that we're not ready to move forward on, we can definitely scale back the request. So that would, without tax, drop us down to 314,000 per year.
And if we go to 314,000, that's $80,000 increase, and that's just the escalation clause that Microsoft has in there. So in the 3-year contract from the prior 3 years, what was the escalation clause in there in terms of how many % did it go up each year?
We were locked in for 3 years, so there was no,
Oh, so we were locked in at a
and
fixed
that's what we
price.
would be doing today is
And
locking
this
in
would-
the pricing for 3 more
And
years.
this would lock us in for another 3 years
Correct.
Yeah.
at that price.
The only escalation she has in there is if,
We buy more computers.
yeah, if we need more licenses and she's kind of built it in a 7% just as an estimate.
Right.
And we may or may not even do that. Yeah,
Yeah, that part I'm clear that
okay.
32%, that's trying to relate
gotcha.
that to cost of business kind of thing. So in 3 years, you'd expect depends on how they did the previous contract. Remember, doing percentages is always entertaining.
Yeah.
But that's a hefty increase.
It is.
Now, if you
With
go to
what
the
is
grocery
essentially a
store, you think
monopoly.
that-
We
yeah.
tried something different and it's not working for us.
Right. We have to have
Yeah.
our enterprise licensing and
Then there are other issues like, have any of you ever gone to this store and tried to buy yourself a new operating system? I mean, you've got various options. And you would buy that based on your needs. The needs of our users here are pretty widespread, but a majority of us are not tied to too much. So do we have any possibility of saying out of, I don't know, 600 licenses, 200 are hot shots and the rest of us?
we look at it. There is a frontline license, which we've used for like the committee, like the Board of Health, rather than giving them a full enterprise license where it's installed on the computer, a client based. It's all web based. So we are scaling and accounting for user usage.
How much is that helping us?
It's a significant, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but the license per licensing, it's not $387. It's quite a bit less.
So what are we really trying to do here? Are we trying to say we want to buy this stuff, or are we trying to say that we're going to set a budget aside? Because they're not the same thing. If you're saying that we need to have $500,000 aside because we got some problems to fix, I can probably be swayed. If you're saying we got to buy this stuff, I'm saying I'm not a happy camper at all.
Well, the way I look at it is two different things. We got a license renewal of something that we use right now for our people to access what they need to access. The addition is if we want to add a retention thing. So that's a different animal
Correct.
to me. So the
Correct.
first part I'm saying, if we're talking renewal, I don't control how much Microsoft's going to charge us. I don't like that it increases, but I think our people still need to access. I think we need some retention changes in the future, but I'm not saying it's right now. We just have to, once we get to where we're comfortable with what that could do, we have to be willing to spend some money at that time.
Okay, so the purpose of this is just to have a public discussion.
And then also prepare for our enterprise agreement renewal that
When does Microsoft renew that? When was that
is the
due?
end of this month.
The end of this month?
Mhm.
And the 32% increase, that's apples to apples.
Yep.
You're not adding any features, you're not adding anything to that.
Correct. And then I have it in my notes, the enterprise frontline license again, which is just cloud applications, is $84 per user versus
Again,
300.
please.
What?
I did not hear adequately what you said.
The frontline license cost per user is $84.
That's the bare minimum that you talked about,
That's for the
the
cloud.
scaled back
Mhm.
version.
So some of our people get that and some get the other, and is that all built into this whatever?
Mhm.
You've kind of taken the whole cost and just divided it by users instead. So we have so many at this price and we have so many at that price. But
So
personally, I'm okay with renewing our service. I'm thinking we have more work to do on this retention piece.
Right, we have no choice but to renew the licensing.
Yeah.
That I agree.
Okay.
That it's apples to apples, it really needs to be apples to apples, and 32% at this point, I'm unfamiliar whether that is reasonable or not. Not that we can do anything about that, but prices aren't determined arbitrarily. The vendors has some algorithm, and I don't know what that algorithm is.
Yeah,
32%, 10% a year increase. I don't know.
yeah,
We're somewhat a captive audience.
yeah, I agree with you, Arn.
Yeah.
So I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I'm hearing up here is we're okay with that, just apples to apples renewal.
Okay.
We'll do some work on the other. We're not gonna throw that out, but we want to see how that's gonna work before we make a decision on that. Are we good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
When it comes to budget time, though, we're ready to set some aside. We've got to do something. We need to be building it up.
Oh, absolutely. The sad story is IT has been troublesome since I first got here. And it cost us to get ourselves out of the hole. There's some things where I'm still scratching my head on, and some I even voted on in good faith, like the phone system, but those things are, I think it's really important. I've said it 1,000 times. Let's have a plan that we can all sit and look at and say, yes. And I've been asking about that for a little over a year.
Well, sometimes in that starts with us where we decide we have to give direction and say, we want the county to be able to do this. And I haven't been here long enough to know, maybe we've done that. I mean, the county should recover in 48 hours. I'm just throwing numbers out there, or the county should do this. These are the parameters we think the county should have. Now you develop a plan that makes those parameters happen. And maybe we've done that. I haven't been here long enough to tell you if we have or we haven't. But really both sides have some work to do on that.
Yeah.
Are we clear as mud?
Pretty clear as mud.
License renewal, we're good. We'll work on the other.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're running. Can I touch a little bit of miscellaneous? I know we're running a little bit late, but on the awards, how have we handled it in past? Is this something we sit down and talk about, or we like give Kelly our top 2 and see if there's a common, or what do we do?
You've been here the longest.
We've just developed the consensus, kind of like how you described, letting the clerk know the top choices that we.
So see if each of us gave the clerk our top choices. If there was a common one, we could work on. I just don't want to let that sit.
Oh, I agree. In fact, I actually thought this one is complicated enough that I wanted to talk about that in an executive session so we don't, it's performance of
It is all about
the performance of an
Yeah.
employee. And then the other one in principle is just there are lots of things to figure out. It's almost it really is impossible for us to elect an employee of the year out of 500 and some odd employees.
I know it.
And so we're going to have to figure out some strange arguments.
Okay.
And those often are going to be.
So why don't we commit to taking a look at that, and tomorrow afternoon we'll hold an executive session and talk it over.
Yeah.
We
Sounds
good?
good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw
We're,
that.
No, we
I
have.
saw
we're
the
all up
score.
to,
We have.
we've got all of that.
How much time, Jessica? Okay. and performance. So 15 minutes total on performance of a public employee and 10 minutes on collective bargaining. Okay. Let's do it.
The board is extending the executive session for a period of 5 minutes until 11:39 a.m.
Okay, we're back from executive session. No decisions were made.
Jessica Warren, Human Resources. I would like to request to fill the risk manager position.
So move.
We need a motion. We got,
So,
Okay. we have a motion. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Thank you. Any other miscellaneous? I see no hands.
Mr. Chairman, I have a new appointment, but I'm trying to get it pushed back a little bit.
Okay, so we will adjourn the 10 o'clock meeting and then we'll start up right away with the other. Okay.